Was Scream 6 just Scream 2 all over again? Let's get into it.
Well, sometimes that is better.
To preface this video a little bit, one of the biggest criticisms I've seen about the latest Scream installment is that it's a little too similar to Scream 2. While I do believe that Scream 6 has many of the same attributes of Scream 2, I wouldn't call it a direct ripoff of that sequel. In this video, I want to explore some of those things, so let's just get right on into them. Deep inside the SMOOTHIE. I can't believe I'm gonna leave that in the video. This is gonna get demonetized. It just is. Starting off with point number 1, talking about the college setting that these films both kind of share, let's talk about Scream 2 first. In Scream 2, Agnes Scott College portrays the fictional Windsor College in Ohio. Scream 2's backdrop really makes it feel like you're at a college campus in Ohio, except for when you're seeing flora that doesn't exactly fit in Ohio, I would know as an Ohio native, but besides that, it totally works. This is also your little plot excuse, as I like to call it, to get your characters out of Woodsboro, California, and now somewhere new. But that's the only similarity between Scream 2 and Scream 6, because Scream 6's backdrop is very, very different. While, yes, our characters are mostly here because of college in Scream 6, the backdrop is absolutely, and not even with an argument, New York City. Like, you could have subtitled Scream 6 Ghostface Takes Manhattan if you wanted to. You can't really say that about Scream 2. Like, what would you say about Scream 2? Ghostface attacks a little college in Ohio. It's just not as exciting as New York City. They're very different settings, and really the only similarity is that this is our device used to get our characters from point A to point B. So not only are they different colleges, Blackmore and Windsor, they're also in totally different cities. I actually kind of prefer the New York setting. It's really cool, and it challenges one of our other favorite Manhattan set slashers, Jason Takes Manhattan. I mean, hey, at least Ghostface wasn't on a boat for 3/4 of the movie. It could have been worse. Another similarity criticism I've been seeing is that Mindy and Randy pretty much have the same arc, but it's a little different at the end. As much as I love Mindy, I am going to give Randy the edge here a little bit. I do think that his whole little monologue in Scream 2 talking about sequels is a little more interesting than what Mindy brings to the table in Scream 6. This is really the only instance where I feel like Scream 6 is directly copying Scream 2, because we have this entire sequence in the movie where they're in the park and they're kind of talking a little bit about sequel rules. That was a lot of equals. This scene, I would argue, is the only point where we're actually just directly ripping off Scream 2, because I don't think that they really add much to the conversation. It's pretty much the same thing, and if anything, Scream 6's sequence is a little more in your face than Scream 2's commentary. That does not ring true with the rest of Scream 6, though. I would argue that the rest of the commentary is done really well, and not directly like shoving it down your throat in your face. This is really the only moment where I feel like that's the case. And Jasmine Savoy Brown's fantastic. I love her as the Randy character. I just feel like it's a little much with the writing specifically. The performance is there. I love everybody in this scene, but it's just a little too in your face, I think. Scream 2 also has some balls to kill Randy in this sequence where he's kind of talking to Ghostface over the phone. That was pretty awesome. I do think it's a bit of a missed opportunity to not have Randy in Hollywood for Scream 3. I mean, tell me that wouldn't have been awesome, but at the same time, this was a really ballsy move in Scream 2. I will say though, I prefer Mindy's attack on the subway versus Randy's death, because basically all they did is they pulled him into a van and squirted some strawberry sauce on his face. Mindy painfully gets stabbed in the stomach, and then nobody cares at all on the subway. That is terrifying. Even though Mindy doesn't die in that sequence, it's still a million times better than Randy's kinda cop-out death. It was mostly done off screen for one of the coolest Scream characters ever, Fight Me. Now, the biggest comparison I've seen, which has also led to some of the biggest criticisms of Scream 6, is that the motive between 2 and 6 is essentially the same thing. Let's break that down for a minute, because I feel like there's more to the Scream 6 motive than what meets the eye. Spoiler alert, in Scream 2, when Mrs. Loomis reveals herself to be one of the killers and kills Mickey, her accomplice, she talks about how his motive was a little too 90s. She has a good old-fashioned revenge motive. She just kind of wants to kill Sydney because she killed her son. Sydney killed Billy, and Mrs. Loomis thinks that Billy was nothing but a good boy. He was a good boy! Personally, I have never been super impressed by this motive. This is basically just the original Friday the 13th, which, hot take, I've never been that big of a fan of. Almost every Friday sequel tops the original in my opinion, so I don't know, it's a weird movie to pull from, and one of the weakest parts of it too. We basically just had Pamela Voorhees here with Mrs. Loomis. It's the same character essentially. And her performance is so over the top for a grieving mother, it's just completely unbelievable to me, and I've just never really cared for it. Now, admittedly, Detective Bailey, who does share a similar motive, is acting a little goofy in Scream 6. I don't know why this franchise thinks that grieving parents are gonna be really goofy characters, but I guess they do. You know, that's just a consistent thing between two teams of creatives. I don't get it. I really don't. That, I will admit, I don't really love about either film, but I think Detective Bailey's motive is a little more interesting than Mrs. Loomis's. It's not just being a Pamela Voorhees stand-in. Wayne here wants to blame Sam for all of the murders from the previous film and the current one that you're watching, and also blames himself for Richie's obsession with the stab movies. Like, yes, he is the parent character of the previous killer, but it's so different from Mrs. Loomis. It is in no way the same thing. They go into detail about these little tiny things that makes 5 retroactively so much more interesting, where I don't feel like Scream 2 does that. All that Scream 2 does is say there's a mother character for the killer from the previous film. And that's it. Detective Bailey gives us some new insights on Richie Kirsch, making him a much more interesting killer in the previous film. Knowing that his family kind of resented him for loving these horror movies is so much more interesting than Mrs. Loomis, who was just upset that her good boy decided to kill some people. I wish Dermot Mulroney had played this character a little more straight, a little more evil, I will say, but besides that, I love the Scream 6 third act. I think it kicks ass. Scream 6 changes the game, kind of building off of stuff from the past and making it something fresh and new. It's not just the exact same thing, and that's kind of what I've always wanted from a sequel to any movie. Like Randy said in Scream 2, sequels are just inferior by definition. They have to be kind of similar to the original, but also find a way to do something new. So unless you're one of the outliers like Terminator 2 and Aliens, you're not going to make a movie that's better than the original 9 times out of 10. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it just doesn't happen most of the time. The best sequels are the ones that build off of the DNA of the franchise and find something new, a new story to be told with a similar premise. Scream 2 has some commentary on sequels that is used for laughs many times, but it doesn't really feel like it goes anywhere in the ending because, like I said, Mrs. Loomis just shoots Mickey. It's almost like if she was removed from the story entirely, that movie would be a better sequel commentary film. I don't know, just a crazy thought from old Jake, I guess. Although Scream 6 kind of loses the meta horror commentary a little bit, it does focus in on commentary on the franchise itself. You have an early reveal of killers who are then killed by our actual killers, which is one of the coolest moments in the entire movie. That also leads to a Ghostface versus Ghostface sequence, something a lot of fans have always wanted to see, and we finally got that in Scream 6. Towards the end of the film, we also get 2 killers at the same time stabbing the shit out of Chad. I don't care if he lived, that scene is still awesome. Maybe one of my favorite sequences in the entire franchise when they both wipe the blades simultaneously. That is so cool. What? And for the first time in Scream history, we had 3 killers revealed at the end. And if you count Jason and Greg from the beginning, technically there were 5 Ghostface killers in this movie. Taking it even a step farther, you could even argue that Sam is a Ghostface killer herself because she puts on Billy's robe at the end of the film. I wouldn't go so far as to say that personally, but there is certainly an argument. Like I was saying in a bunch of my Scream 6 update videos, if they go the 3 killer route, just more killers than the usual 2 that we get from, well, most of these movies except for 3. I just hope that they do it with a point, and I feel like they did do that with a point here. Every killer has a certain purpose. Quinn's character, for instance, dies so that she can be on the other side of town, making Josh Segarra's character look hella sus. Jack Champion's character was an econ during the big attack sequence, and I know Radio Silence said that's not the case, but that kind of makes his whole character pointless if that is the case, so it makes more sense for him to be an econ. So that's my headcanon. You guys can fight me on that. Like, think about that for 2 seconds. The Meeks Martin twins could look up his schedule, so if he wasn't an econ, well, maybe he was killing all of their friends. So it just makes more sense for Detective Bailey to be there so that he can swap out the body of Quinn. And then, of course, Detective Bailey, he's working with the police. He can misdirect them all he wants. He's like the lead detective in this whole investigation. It's perfect setup. Every Ghostface has a purpose, even Jason and Greg at the beginning, to be slaughtered and have their own motive. It's really interesting. There's so much food for thought with Scream 6. I feel like I can talk about this movie forever, and I can't say the same about Scream 2. It's pretty cut and dry, exactly how it is in the film. In Scream 6, you can make some crazy fucking arguments. Like I was talking about with Jack Champion. Was he the one that was there killing people or not? It's an argument to say the least. That to me is ultimately so much more interesting and gives it this crazy amount of rewatchability. I know that's not a word, but I like to use it all the time. Rewatchability, fight me. And I want to say that this isn't to say that Scream 2 isn't a good time. It has some really campy, cheesy moments that I know a lot of us appreciate. I've just always preferred the darker stuff, especially in the Scream franchise because they don't do it that often. It almost feels taboo in a way because this franchise has always been more on the campier, cheesy side of things, which once again, not a bad thing. I just like that we're doing something new here in these later sequels. We're not just doing the same thing we already did in Screams 2 and 3. Scream 6, in my opinion, is the first dark Scream. Every other movie before that just feels a little too campy or cheesy in moments. This one really commits to the darkness. They could have killed some more people at the end, admittedly, but I think overall the tone of this film is the darkest one we've gotten yet from this franchise. So overall, both of of these films are not without flaws, but I love both of them for totally different reasons. So to say that both of these movies are exactly the same, it's just not a very good argument in my opinion. Personally, I love all the Scream movies. I think they are all a very fun time, and you can get something different from every entry in this franchise, making it one of the better horror franchises ever. But what do you guys think about this comparison? Leave me something about it in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching this little comparison video of Scream 2 and Scream 6. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more horror content in the future. Please consider supporting me on Patreon by clicking that link in the description below. Thank you all for watching again, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.